All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Pros with Con podcast. With me, I have a special guest this week, Sadie Schultheis. Say hello, Sadie.
Hello, everyone.
Sadie works in therapy. She has her own practice. We've known each other from back in the day, but never really formally met, I don't think, other than the passing, maybe at
Yes.
hello at a party or something. But she lives in Jacksonville, Florida currently and home for the weekend, so it was cool to get her on. She's works a lot with mental health and mental therapy and how that correlates with the gym, physical fitness, all these things and how they kind of go together. So it's going to be a great conversation. I know I've had some people reach out and say this is a topic they're interested in hearing about. So big shoes to fill there, but I
Oh,
think it'd
yes.
be great. So she says she's been seeing a lot of this over the last few years, especially with everything going on in the world. So thought this was a perfect opportunity to kind of get something out to people to kind of relate to in that sense. And we'll talk a lot about a lot of things, what she does, what she's currently up to, how you can find her, all these things. So I'm excited for this one. I think it'll be good.
Yeah, me too.
So thank you for coming on. I think this is going to be a great episode.
Of course.
Yeah, so go ahead and give the people a little background
Okay.
about who you are, what you do, all those good stuff, and
Perfect.
kind of take it from there.
All right. So, born and raised in Beaver County.
That's right.
Yes. So, first class of Central Valley.
Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. You were center the whole time, and then
Center,
last year,
yes,
Central
and they
Valley.
Threw that in there
All
last
right.
minute. So I got into mental health whenever I moved to Florida in 2015. So more background on that. So I actually didn't start out in mental health. I initially went to school for funeral service.
Okay.
Yes, so most people don't know that. And I did that for 2 years for school, and then I ended up just finding out it wasn't for me. And I felt like, okay, there has to be more to like help grieving families aside from
the actual
like preparing their loved ones and things like that. Like what does the aftermath look like? Because there's a lot of like grieving and also like mental health things that end up coming up after someone passes, of course. So my family and I had moved to Jacksonville for my mom's job, and I was in like I guess a weird space, like limbo of I don't know what to do. So because I already had my undergrad, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And mental health was something that, of course, I was interested in. So I was like, okay, talk to my mom about it. And coincidentally, Jacksonville University, their first inaugural cohort was going to start with a master's program in clinical mental health counseling in January 2020, or not 2020, 2016. So I was like, okay, well, I might as well just apply for it. And then my program was 2 years. I went obviously through school, and I started my internship, my clinical internship, working at a residential crisis facility in Jacksonville with at-risk youth and adolescents. They were 10 to 17. So it was respite care. So what that kind of means is it was a 30-day max that a child could end up staying with us. Typically what would bring them there would be like runaway, like domestic violence, if Department of Children and Families were involved. So if there was any like suspicions of abuse or something going on in the house, DCF would bring them to our care for roughly like 30 days, sometimes longer, until they kind of got the family in sorts. A lot of like deemed, and I do not like this term, ungovernable children. Open to interpretation there. I'm like, okay, well, that can be like misunderstood, like misguided. Again, truancy was a big thing where just like kids just weren't going to school. And then they actually had a board or like group of individuals that would meet for like case staffing to be like, okay, should this person go to residential facility to like get them back on track? Because we did also offer school through Duval County School in Jacksonville. So that was a lot of the kids that I first started working with. And it is what it is. It was a crisis facility. So crisis 24/7. Fights, cursing.
You
defiance.
were on site for there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I worked there I did my internship, like I said, and then I worked there a year after I graduated. It was very rewarding. I don't want to chalk it up to like it was a bad experience for me. I think it really helped me learn essential skills for therapy and like as a therapist, and also get an understanding of like what does today's youth look like, because they are deemed misunderstood and troubled. I hear that a lot too. And I'm like, okay, but if you actually sit some of these kids down, they just want someone to talk to. Like they don't want to, I don't want to say they don't want to talk to their parents, but it's that dynamic. As a therapist, we're not in an authority role. So it can be like, I can be kind of what you need in that moment, where principals, teachers, parents, those are all authority figures. So most of the time, unless you have a strong, like secure attachment, with a lot of these kids did not have like with their parents, you're going to be vulnerable. I mean, you're going to just unfortunately succumb to your circumstances and then not really have anyone to talk to. And then people wonder why they were out past curfew or like skipping school and things like that. But I say all that to say a lot of the kids I also were working with were at or below poverty. So it was also rewarding for me to be like, okay, if I have one person throughout their life, I'm fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I'm not here to save the world. And I think that's kind of what a lot of therapists end up getting into the field for, is like, I want to help everyone. And that's a recipe for burnout. You learn that very quick. That we can't be there for everyone and then not be there for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So it was mentally, emotionally, physically draining to do that 5 days a week, and then also have on-call time as well. So I ended up transitioning out of that role and into an outpatient role within the same nonprofit. And I worked there with children from 3 to 12. So I wanted to kind of get into play
that
therapy.
Young, really?
Yeah, I wanted to get into play therapy. So it was super rewarding, because then you actually have kids that aren't forced to be there, but also are there with the intent of like, okay, like I have someone to talk to. And there's like a level of trust that is there, where maybe in these other adolescents that I had the pleasure to work with, it took some time. And then unfortunately you only have 30 days. So like by the time the rapport is there, it's like, okay, like you're on your way. And then I don't really know what ends up happening. But with these ones, it was outpatient. So it was longer term. Like I would see some of these kids for months, and like being able to see the progression, you're like, wow, like this is impactful, especially getting parent engagement and things like that. After that, I moved to Miami for a year, with the intent to start a PhD program. And I started working in private practice there. So I kind of transitioned roles. I was seeing kids still, but at the same time, I was seeing adults and couples and families. So
a lot of variety in there.
And it was good. So again, past experiences, a lot of the kids I saw were trauma. Like there was some level of trauma that was present there. So I ended up trying to niche in more of trauma-informed care. Like what kind of modalities can I get trained and certified in? That's really going to help niche me into, this is what someone's going to like seek me out for. So I was in that private practice for 2.5 years, and then I recently branched out on my own, and now have my own practice. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Very good stuff.
I think I covered kind of everything. Whenever it comes to like schooling and
absolutely.
Like that. But
I think that's pretty cool, just for people to hear more about you. Kind of like how you even got into that mindset and involved in that kind of field. I think that's important for people to understand the path that you take and all that good stuff. But that's awesome. I feel like we had a discussion beforehand, just starting a business and how busy that is. And I think that's important too, that's part of it now too. So it's not just everything else you do, but it's also making sure that the business is being ran properly.
Of course.
So it can add some stress. But all in all, I know you find it rewarding just based off of how you carry yourself in that field. So I think it's awesome to hear something like that. And the whole point of this one is to kind of see the effects that it's been taking on people over the last few years, specifically for sure, but just overall. And then also how that correlates with physical health and why they can coincide and make sure one helps the other and vice versa.
Of course.
Which is probably a pretty big deal, I would say, that you deal with. But often, and just figuring out these kind of steps to get you here and why you think and act and believe the way that you do.
For sure. And I know we talked about even like COVID. I kind of brazed over that because you could have a whole podcast session on COVID.
We sure can.
And mental health.
Welcome back whenever you want.
Yeah. But that's a whole other thing too, where people were isolated at their house and the huge need for therapy just spiked astronomically with like anxiety, depression, just like the isolation. I even know I think it was on the 15th, it's been 3 years since the lockdown.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Like, where have 3 years gone?
Seriously though. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like a memory gap for a lot of people of like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened for 3 years.
That's a good point. People are going to read about this in the history books too.
Honestly.
In 50 years and like, yeah, I remember that time.
Yeah. And I think it was also a good time for one, mental health, but also what were people doing with their time? I mean, a lot of people transitioned to remote work because everything was shut down, or unfortunately, you didn't have a job at all. And there's a whole other component to that too, of like, well, how do you sustain your everyday living life with families or even as a single person too?
Yeah.
It was hard times. Excuse me. But I think it also kind of allowed some people to refocus. I know we kind of view it as something that was negative of like, you know, our world essentially shut down for X amount of months or years. But I also saw a lot of people at that time kind of segueing into like even fitness, but also start to focus on like self-care even of like, okay, I can't have access to the gym. So like, what can I do within my own means to just continue to stay mentally active, physically active, and try to be as socially active too, since that was taken away from a lot of people. Yeah,
definitely. And that's, where were you at during that kind of, was that your Miami years?
So I was in Jacksonville. I was in a transition phase actually during that time. So COVID started, everything shut down in March. I moved into like a temporary apartment in Jacksonville from May until I left for Miami in August.
Okay.
So even from a mental health perspective, moving to even like a new city for me and like not having a sense of community or knowing anyone, like I was kind of going there with the hopes of pursuing a PhD, which I kind of glossed over. I ended up not sticking with it because it just wasn't something that suited my lifestyle and wasn't my expectation.
Sure.
But it's also like, what is that like for people, or especially like being someplace new, or even pandemics were new for all of us.
It's a little bit of a new thing.
I think.
Like
no one kind of knew what to expect. So like not even having that sense of community there too, of how does that affect mental health? Yeah,
definitely. So. It's just figuring out where you were in that journey of your specific career, just when COVID and everything was happening, and how that kind of influence a lot of the stuff today.
Correct.
That you do, because you're fully remote, like practice and
fully
stuff.
Remote.
So we'll get into all that for sure, and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's pretty cool.
And telehealth has been a new thing too. I mean, I didn't do that at my agency. I didn't know a lot of therapists in independent private practice were doing that at the time. So it was kind of just like, okay, abrupt. We can't see patients anymore. So we're going to have to figure out how to do it from a new platform, and also getting the buy-in for people of, okay, this is not traditional therapy. Like I'm used to being face-to-face, sitting in an office with someone. And now there's this thing that is a barrier now. But it ends up being a good thing because you can reach more people.
And I guess that's kind of one of the things you just touched on with like, what were the positives from that, everything that happened. So everything shut down, you kind of have to like figure out what to do. How can we still help people? How can we still take care of ourselves. And I mean, that's definitely a positive that it kind of opened doors for a more virtual thing. Like, I know face to face is a whole different thing other than virtual, but you kind of have to do what you got to do. And it just kind of opened up all these avenues, I feel like, for people like yourself as well to reach more people. Not that's for sure not your goal, but you want to do what you can. So
exactly.
I think that's important.
For sure.
Yeah. And then I know you got a bunch of notes there.
Oh, yes. I have a slew.
A slew of notes. That's wonderful. That's what we want. We want to hear more of you.
Yeah.
So go ahead and let's talk about some of the things you want to talk about.
Okay.
I know you sent me a couple topics.
Sure.
General overview, self-esteem, and stuff like that. What you think are most important for people to know about or regarding mental health and how it kind of correlates with physical health and just mental health in general.
Yeah, I mean, even being here, and I kind of will start with even just following you all on Instagram and just kind of seeing what you're doing here at Aurelius. I mean, it's people come most of the time to exercise and work out to get and they get an enormous sense of well-being from it. Like, most people aren't doing it, I would say, for like physique. I mean, there are people that end up doing it for, bodybuilding and things like that in shows, competitions. But most of the time it's just to feel good. I mean, especially after working all day or, again, remote working, a lot of people don't have that social interaction throughout the day. Yeah. So being able to have some sort of outlet and self-care, I think, is extremely important. And I think that's what a lot of people end up going towards, is like going to the gym or like an exercise class, or even Pelotons are a huge thing. Treadmills, like even doing things at the house. I mean, I think it definitely just increases your feel-good hormones, which I can kind of touch on later. But also, physical exercise also helps with feeling more energized throughout the day. I mean, sleep is improved by it. Your memory, concentration. I think they're some of those things that just people don't realize actually occur just from even being some sort of physical activity for 15 minutes a day can tremendously impact your mental health and even physical health too. So I think I have some other colleagues too that also talk on just physical health and physical fitness being even its own medicine.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think it's a huge thing.
Movement as medicine you have here. We're big believers of that here.
Correct. Yeah. And that's the purpose of your body, like, is to move. We weren't meant to just sit behind a desk or just sit on a couch and not physically move. Yeah. So one of the things that I found interesting that I actually had come across was a growing number of studies have come out that have also demonstrated exercise not only recovers or minimizes like negative deficits that end up coming up from lack of activity, but it also improves like our neuroplasticity, which is kind of like our way to like bounce back from certain things that may come up because of pathology that may arise, like such as anxiety, depression, things of that we may just experience because of life events or stressors or genetics sometimes. So I think that's a huge, interesting fact that has been coming out, because I would say up until probably like 2-3 decades ago, we don't talk about mental health. It's hugely stigmatized. And for someone to actually be like, hey, like I have anxiety or depression, or like I've experienced some type of trauma and now I have post-traumatic stress disorder or another stress-related disorder, has been profound. I mean, just to be able to be like, hey, like I have these things, I'm not defined by them, but there's something that just I live with and I manage on a daily basis, and exercise and physical activity being one of those things that can help me. Yeah. I think it's hugely impactful too.
Something that's like not prescribed, like it's easily just to go do and see how it affects you. Yeah.
Exactly. So even like for individuals that have been diagnosed with depression, whatever on the spectrum of depression, again, 15 minutes of exercise can also equate to a supplement for being prescribed antidepressants and not having all of the side effects and, things that end up coming up because you're on psychotropic medications. It's not to say it's a bad thing if you are, but if you're able to even be on psychotropic meds, also be physically active, engage in self-care, most individuals don't want to be on medication forever. I hear that all the time of like, I'm even hesitant to go see a psychiatrist because I don't want to be on medication. Or like, if I start it, I feel like I'm going to be dependent on it and then I'm not ever going to get off of it.
I think that's an impactful thing to hear, that you say most people, or a good majority of people, would rather not be on medications if they could help it. I think that's very inspiring to hear, that people would rather choose movement over a prescription.
Correct.
I think that's phenomenal, and I think that's just something that a lot of people take for granted, I would say. So that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, there's even a large majority now that I've started to communicate with of holistic practitioners even that have been able to treat people with mood disorders even with strictly vitamins. Like high dose vitamins that you can't, most of the time, I mean, you can get them over the counter, but like taking them consistent, or even like having some sort of like vitamin injections to kind of really boost the production of them, because we produce them naturally, right? But sometimes even like vitamin D, I mean, you get it from the sun, but if you're not outside a lot or living in Pennsylvania, no offense.
Like you're not from here. Moved away a few years ago. I'm just kidding.
I'm new here.
She lives in Florida now. It's fine. She said it has been a little rainy and a little crappy back home. So.
But you figure, I mean, a couple of years ago, Seattle had more sunny days than Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Well, that's embarrassing.
I mean, it might be embarrassing, but also like
it's reality.
It's also statistically, I mean, people that live in northern states or like on Pacific Northwest, they have a higher rate of mood disorders such as depression, even just because of the lack of sun.
Yeah. There you have it. Get some sun.
Or move to Florida, whichever you
prefer.
Or
move to Florida. Sign me up.
Yeah. So I think I wanted to touch on that because I think it's also really important as well. But
like simple things too, like
like
movement,
exactly.
Get the sun, things that everybody can do if they have access to, for sure. I mean, the sun, it is what it is, but
right. But I mean, I think that's kind of why people are like, oh, I can't wait for summer.
Yeah.
Like, have we ever thought about why people are like, oh, I can't wait for summer? But no, I mean, it's, again, these are things that just like naturally occur in our lives, but they're often overlooked because they're just there.
Yeah. I guess even like taken for granted in some sense, but simple things that everyone can do.
Correct.
If they just choose to do it that way.
Exactly.
Very important.
Right. So, I mean, I think even one of the things to consider too, whenever you are exercising. Now, I don't do CrossFit, but I've gotten into even like Pilates over the past several months because I was like, okay, I need to start to do something because I work from home. You cook dinner and then you're like, okay,
get up, do it all again tomorrow.
What do I do now?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, it's something that I wanted to try. I've never tried it before.
Yeah.
But one of the things I like, especially with Pilates too, is, and yoga even.
Yeah.
There's a lot of focus on breath work too. Okay. And whenever I'm in therapy and teaching positive coping skills, deep breathing techniques are hugely impactful.
As I say, have you taken some stuff away from those things and used them?
Yeah. So even diaphragmatic breathing, even most people are just short breaths, or you're in the middle of talking and then people are like, okay, I got to catch my breath because you're not breathing.
Yeah. Too busy talking.
Yes. Yeah. So, or even whenever you are exercising too, I mean, I don't know how you all are here, but our heart rate naturally increases. Yeah. So being mindful of doing breath work exercises too can also be helpful in grounding for your mental health too. So even whenever you're exercising, being mindful of how do your feet feel as they're planted on the floor, or am I feeling tension anywhere, or while I'm lifting, feel your muscles contract. I know we're kind of doing it and zoning out most of the time, but there's also importance in being in tune with your body.
Yeah,
like, how is it feeling in the moment?
Yeah, 100%.
Because I think one of the things too is then people end up getting into fitness as one, like a positive outlet, but then it can also go the other way of being hyper focused on it. Yeah. And it ends up being more negative, like to your mental health.
Yeah.
So I also work with a lot of, I would say, like young adults that are guys as well. And even like the level of body dysmorphia too, of like, hey, like if I don't hit the gym, or like if I don't stay to the specific diet, like my body feels like crap, or like I don't feel like myself, or I completely avoid the mirror.
Yeah.
Like, how does that affect your mental health?
Yeah.
And then also your relationship with working out.
Yeah. We kind of touched on that last week in the episode with Corey, just the psychological response you get immediately from seeing the gym, hearing about the gym, whatever the case is, and like how that could go either way, positive or negative. And then I think that's awesome that, of course, you're on the next episode and how that can kind of relate to where you come in now to help people understand those feelings and talk about them and see what they think and where to go from here.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, again, even was trying to implement some type of like grounding techniques, even just like in your everyday life, like I talked about, with like deep breathing techniques. A lot of people will end up doing like mindfulness meditation. Like it may be intimidating to some people, but at the same time, even if you start with like 2-minute videos that you can find on YouTube, I mean, just to kind of recenter yourself throughout the day, it brings you back like to reality. I mean, our days are busy. Time gets away from us. A lot of people have kids and families and work now, like sometimes 2-3 jobs. And then what are you doing for you at the end of the day?
Yeah.
I mean, I tell my patients all the time, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Wonderful. Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. You can't do all of that and on an empty cup for sure, meaning if you don't take care of yourself, that's only going to last so long. You have to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Correct. So you can do all those things for all those people.
Right. And I think even too, with whenever it comes to even like anxiety as well, a huge portion of that is breath work and being able to calm yourself down, because most individuals will end up experiencing like racing thoughts or like flooding thoughts or intrusive thoughts. And then it's like, how do I get rid of these? Because now I'm just sitting on them and I have no way to, I don't want to act on them, but at the same time, what do I do with them? So, I mean, exercise can also be one of those things, in the breath work as well, because they are naturally grounding. They do require you to be present in the moment, when most of the time we're either fixated on the future and what we need to do, or what has already happened. And that's outside of our control at that point.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of putting it. Think about just that as a whole. Yeah. And whatever you can do, just to touch on like your Pilates journey and your yoga journey, doesn't have to be CrossFit, doesn't have to be anything. Find something that is physically active that you enjoy. So those are all parts of it that we like to talk about on here. It doesn't have to be CrossFit. We just like that form of fitness because of all the things that tie into it. But whatever you enjoy gives you that positive psychological response that we've talked about with Corey and you just touched on as well. I think that's what is what most important and what people need in their lives.
Right. And I think it's also kind of just finding what level and intensity of fitness works best for you.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to, I wouldn't be able to keep up with you guys.
You'd be perfect. We would take care of you, don't worry.
No, but I'm like, okay, realistically, and I think that's another thing too, and I keep saying I think, but I know also for a fact, we oftentimes just want to skip steps and we like want the immediate gratification.
Oh yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And that trips up a lot of people.
Yeah.
Of I want to get fit, or like I want to lose the weight, or you know, have some sort of inspiration that you want to look like or be like. And then we end up forgetting that it's a ladder.
Yeah.
I mean, what ends up happening if you skip steps 1 through 5? I mean, you're going to fall and you're going to hurt yourself and probably be you're going to be more discouraged and less likely to want to try again.
Yeah. Yeah. So. That's, I mean, again, beautifully said. Couldn't say it better myself. There's like steps you need to do. And like, this is the kind of the whole point, at least one of them, to help people understand what it takes to not only be mentally and physically okay, but what goes into that. So all the steps of like with your nutrition and how you handle yourself on a daily basis with interaction with people. All these things are
Correct.
just all tied in together. And I think that's cool that you just see that from like a mental health and health professional perspective and how we can apply it here. And that's kind of the whole point of this, I think.
Yeah. And I think a huge part of, again, with the I think, Sadie.
You know it for a fact. You're good. You're confident. You know your stuff. Sadie, I know this is true.
Right.
Yeah.
And I lose my train of thought.
Sorry.
No. No.
I think that I made you lose your train of thought.
But one of the things that I like too is a lot of people end up wanting positive reinforcement too, which it's hard to give ourselves at the end of the day because majority of individuals are very hard on themselves and have high expectations, and they want to be able to just do these things. And it comes back to what I had just mentioned of it takes time. Like, be patient with yourself. I can't tell you again how many times I tell my patients that give yourself grace. Like, you didn't get here overnight.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, and to have the expectation of changing overnight,
it just puts unfair pressure on yourself.
Correct.
Like, way too much unfair pressure. Like, you don't deserve that. You deserve to know the patience that it takes and what comes from that. And it's not easy by any means, I'm sure. I mean, I'm definitely guilty of it, you know, but you have to figure it out and understand what gives you that grace and patience and all these things.
Where does that come from, though?
Yeah.
Like, for a lot of people, they don't even know where to start with that because of either like self-esteem or body image issues or just social media even. Like, what are you being fed on a daily basis, like through algorithms on Instagram or Twitter and TikTok? Most of the time you see extremely edited pictures of celebrities and like fitness models and things of that, and then people aspire to be like that, and then when they aren't, then it's, well, what am I doing? Like, I can't look like that. But it's also reframing the thoughts of, well, what makes you want to look like that? Like, what do you feel like you're going to gain or get if you do end up looking that way? And most of the time, it's, you're still not going to be happy with yourself at the end of the day, even if you are super fit, because there are other things that may be going on, which then we end up kind of segueing into therapy of where does that come from? And having to explore it from that aspect. Yeah,
definitely. I think, I mean, you met Frank out there when he came in here. He touched on that in his episode with nutrition. He's very nutrition focused, but he identifies a lot of what you just said as being part of the psychological response with food and people and how they see everyone on Instagram or all over social media and body imagery and all these things and how they tie into your response and how you feel with food.
Correct.
So like even just saying that from like a physical fitness, mental health, all these things, but even tying that into nutrition and how that is connected in that way. That's just like pretty much like word for word what he was talking about. And I thought that's super cool to connect that in a way. And there's just like so many different like avenues and perspectives that people bring, which is why I think this is cool just to have this conversation, but it's also important.
Right. And like, what is the accessibility most of the time to like healthy foods? I mean, even in America, I mean, it's no secret right now with inflation, food is expensive.
Yeah, it definitely is.
I mean, that's why most people end up making a fast food choice or, you know, something that's more convenient and easy, like for their lifestyle, like rather than going home and cooking.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know a lot of people that cook from scratch or like have the time to even be like, okay, how do I plan out my weekly meals and end up getting them on the fly, which then end up not being healthy choices. And even you have little beings, little humans that little humans watch you too.
Definitely.
And I think that's a whole other component at the same time of like what is being modeled, like what you are doing is being modeled to other people around you.
Yeah.
And instilling like those values at the same time.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Nutrition is super important. I know it's, again, with the whole grocery situation, I know it's pricey, but what we end up putting into our body ends up affecting our mental health as well.
Yeah.
Especially with like highly processed foods even. And like chemicals and other things, additives that are in our foods that we just consume on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Or even this water.
Yeah. it's not spring water, it's purified water, but like
the alkalinity or like the acidity that are just in what we drink on a daily basis, that also gets processed in our guts, in our gut. And how does that also affect just like our physical well-being? Because if we're not physically feeling well, most of the time it's going to affect our mental health and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of gut health, I know you wanted to touch on that.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Gut bacteria.
What's the segue from that? Yeah.
So
I think that's an interesting one. Like it's you hear a lot about that these days. I feel like maybe in the last 5 years or so, I've heard a big uptake of gut health and why it's important. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that from your perspective.
Yeah. So I had taken a couple of notes on it because I wanted to be correct whenever I spoke on it. But gut bacteria actually produces hundreds of neurochemicals that the brain uses to regulate basic psychological processes. So most individuals don't realize how that also affects mental health as well. So because there is a large amount of gut bacteria that produces and these psychological processes, it also affects like our learning, like our cognition, memory, things of that people necessarily wouldn't normally consider even. So like for an example, gut bacteria also manufactures about 95% of the body's supply of serotonin.
It's a
lot. So again, and serotonin influences both mood and GI activity. So what you put in your body does matter.
Absolutely. And that just taking that from a perspective of what you put in makes you feel good to perform or do anything physical. And if you're not doing that and you're not getting that output or relief in some way, it then kind of cycles back into your mental health as well, I think, in some capacity. But that's interesting that even gut health is important to monitor and maintain.
Correct.
Because it'll help your physical health, which will then cycle back to your mental health. Which
exactly.
Is an interesting perspective, but one
and,
that people need to hear, I think.
And even serotonin, because it's in high demand for us to be functioning healthy people. That's why most individuals with anxiety and depression end up getting prescribed serotonin reuptake inhibitors because they aren't producing enough serotonin and that is what's causing it's not what's causing, but it's a chemical that we aren't producing enough of that can contribute to anxiety and depression. So
yeah, I guess that's kind of something that was written down here about how those counteract stress and like brain fog and how that kind of aligns as well.
Yes.
I don't know if that's something you also want to touch on, if you haven't already. I mean, yeah. You have the brain fog, at least. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what do you all know about brain fog?
I don't really know too much. I just know that serotonin and everything you just said makes sense to me.
Yeah, right.
So
I mean, and again, I think that's kind of where it goes back to of like brain fog. Most of the time, it's like memory or like a lack of concentration or just like the zoning out. And again, 95% of your serotonin is produced in your gut.
Interesting. That's a big percentage, I think.
95%.
That's a lot of percent.
Yes.
But yeah, that's a super interesting topic and just kind of ties into all the chemical responses you've talked about and serotonin and how gut health plays into that.
Correct. So, yeah. And one of the other things too, I mean, even with exercise, it also helps produce and promote growth of new neurons in your brain as well. So again, they're key areas of the brain, including like your hippocampus, which also can be affected with anxiety and depression as well. So you think even if it's 15 minutes a day of exercising, of even walking, I mean, you're also promoting growth of new neurons in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah, we always like to say how important walks are around here,
especially
really in the summertime. I know I walked a lot last summer, and it's nice to go out, get a nice walk in, but it also just helps you in the long term.
Correct.
I think.
Yeah, and even with the hormones as well. I mean, exercise also, I know we talked about, just decreases stress hormones even too. So exercise can decrease, though I guess the the most familiar one people are familiar with when it comes to stress hormones is cortisol levels. So it can also, with exercise, can increase endorphins in your body, which are the feel-good hormones, of course, and also gives you a natural mood boost because you are being physically active.
Yeah. And you hear a lot, like, people don't have the motivation to go to the gym or do something active, but once they do, they feel a million times better. I don't think that's by coincidence to what you just said. I think that is important, that when people say that, it's actually happening.
Correct.
And understanding that, and just, even if you don't feel like doing it, just go, and I guarantee you might feel better.
Definitely.
So I don't know if that's something that you like talk about on a regular basis with your clients.
Yeah, I mean, exercise is a huge prescription for treatment plans.
Yeah.
I mean, medical providers, psychiatrists, I know a lot of therapists, including myself. I mean, you add it onto your treatment plan. I mean, I can't treat just your mental health if you're not addressing what's going on with your physical health too. And most of the time, like I'd mentioned, it's most individuals that have some sort of like physical ailments or like a poor physical health also have a poor mental health, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So if you could even like get up or even go outside and sitting for 10 minutes, you don't even have to exercise. You could just sit there in a chair or sit on a step.
Yeah.
It's going to affect your health physically and mentally in a positive way.
Yeah. Just getting out of being in the same place for a while, inside, in the office, in the cubicle.
Exactly.
New scenery.
Right.
Sun.
And they're the baby steps too.
Yeah.
So I don't like to put, and I would never put unrealistic expectations on patients, just knowing their overall functioning.
Yeah.
But just trying to do something and just encouraging them, again, like going outside or like going on a walk, or even if you're on your lunch break at work, take a lap.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time. And I think my biggest argument is, what's the difference between getting outside for 15 minutes and you're scrolling on this thing on all ends for over 15 minutes and you're not getting anything besides small hits of dopamine, depending on what your algorithm's putting out for you.
Yeah. Wow. You speak very well. It kind of makes me happy. I don't know. I think people are going to enjoy that. But yeah, I mean, that's just like incredible to hear that, like, the things we believe, you and I, you deal with on a daily basis in like an actual form of healthcare. And I think that's important for people to relate to. It's important for people to hear that it ties into being fit, but also just healthy, and how we can sustain that for the rest of our lives. All these little things we could do that will just stack up day after day. I know that there's probably some instances that it's a lot harder for people than others, which is, that's just life. But how do we deal with it? How do we react to those kind of situations? What can we do to help people feel their most healthy and fit and comfortable? And it just seems like that you understand that, which is, I think, again, for people to hear, just refreshing. I think this is why this is an important episode for people.
Yeah. And again, it's just anytime that you can talk about mental health, I just encourage people to, just because it has been so highly stigmatized. Like if you even just like having a really bad day, or like I woke up this morning, like I had told you earlier, and I'm like, I'm just tired, but you still show up. I mean, you still have to. But then for some people, it's showing up can be even hard. I mean, showing up for yourself mentally, showing up for yourself physically, it's impactful. I mean, it takes a toll on your body, but also how can you combat that in the best way that's going to fit your circumstances? Yeah. I mean, nothing is out of reach for anyone.
Just takes the right people, the right circumstances.
People. Yeah. And I think support is a huge thing.
And you touched on that earlier, I don't know if we were recording yet, but like how important finding that community is, that inspiration and that support system, which we touch on a lot here. Finding that community that helps keep you accountable, but also make you want to keep coming back.
Right. Yeah. I think we talked about it pre-recording, but it was,
let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Pro-recording. During recording.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's super important. There's some people like myself, I would say, where I go through days where I'm like, I'd rather work out by myself. But then there's days where I did Pilates and I was like, okay, like I really like doing this and having a facilitated group and other people that are going there for the same thing and making friends and socializing while also being physically active.
Yeah.
But for some people, I mean, physical health may also be like a form of self-care in a different way of like, I just want to be alone.
Yeah,
like I just want to disconnect and put my headphones on and work it out.
Yeah.
Work it out with myself and with my body.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we always talk about the community here, but I think it's also very beneficial for people to hear that. I mean, even myself, I love to come in here when I'm by myself to do stuff, but I do enjoy that interaction of helping others and being with others. But there is that balance there for a lot of people. I mean, yourself included, that you just said, like, it's important that that's also an output for people, even if it's just by yourself, but you're getting that stress relief in some form.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also good just to have the social support, like you had just mentioned, of keep it going. Most people will start exercising and then they fall off the wagon of like, okay, New Year's resolution, like new year, new me. Yeah. How are you going to be consistent?
I should have had you on last week with Corey. We talked about this all. This is perfect. Good segue. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. But it's okay. New year, new me is good in theory. But my whole thing is, what are you doing? How can you make these goals for yourself? I do a lot of like SMART goals.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So like making them specific, measurable, obtainable, realistic, and timely. How can you do that? Because if you're like, hey, I'm going to be working out 5 days a week, but your schedule is not going to allow that, or like you have other responsibilities that are coming up.
Yeah.
Or you're not working out at all, then you're going to go, okay,
0 to 100.
5 days a week. Come on. We're not going to do that.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes. I'm like, okay. Or I think
I'll support you if you want to do that.
100%.
But let's figure it out.
I was like, okay, we can do 5
let's talk through it a little bit.
We can do 5 days a week, but maybe like slowly, like maybe like 15 minutes of stretching one day, and then maybe doing some cardio the next day, and like slowly getting your feet wet. Because most of the time, I mean, it's you jump in, you're like, oh, I can't do this. And then it kind of goes back to what I had mentioned of I'm discouraged and I'm not going to do it. And it's a lot easier to stay comfortable. Again, nothing grows in a comfort zone.
Yeah.
You got to get outside of it.
You're speaking my language right now. It's good stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
So I can't remember where I was going with my initial train of thought, but it's another thing of just meeting yourself where you're at. I don't believe in shooting too high, but shoot within your current means of where you're at today, because we're not ever in the same place as we were yesterday or even 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to have big goals for sure, but like you said, SMART goals. Are they realistic? As most people who set these kind of goals, I want to do this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, we could do that, but do you know what it takes to get there, and what can we do to help do that?
Correct.
So that's an important conversation for like coaches to have with people here, but also people like yourself, dealing with patients and clients in that sense. Yeah. And I think that's important that like we talk about that a lot as well. Those conversations are super important because they just give insight. They give both people or a group of people the perspective of the other person and understanding where they're coming from. And then like we figure out how can we navigate? What do we do now? What do we do next?
Correct.
All of this is tied in, and it's important to figure out where to go because no one is starting from the same place, or everyone has their own things that are going on. So
exactly.
A lot of factors tie into it, but what can we do to help people? That's it. Like, what can we do?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's a cool topic to hear from your perspective as well. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on in that, or anything other notes that are sticking out to you? Your slur of notes over there.
I know, slowly going through them. Yeah. No, I think one of the things I just had mentioned here was just like the social support and just like even like how do you keep people coming back even like on their days where they're like they may message you or call you and be like, hey, like I'm really not feeling it today.
Yeah. So. It's an interesting thing because just based off the conversation I had last week and the study that he did, when is it the right time to be like, all right, I got to just push through this because I know I'll feel better, versus like, all right, I need to take a step back and find that fine line and that balance of understanding both sides of that. And it can be difficult, but that's where the conversations come into play.
Right.
And like research, like he talked about last week, is important, and how you can apply that, and how that's like part of it. So there's a lot of different ways to go about that, but I think that's also an important thing to consider when finding the right place to go. So support system here, another gym that fits you better, Pilates, yoga. Yep. If you like doing that better, if you like to do the Peloton at home, we don't care as long as you're moving. Just because the research and evidence is there that if you're moving your body, you're getting the medicine that it needs, more so than someone who is not moving their body. And like the goal of this is to help get as many people moving as possible.
Exactly.
Because it's the sustainable aspect of that that'll help you feel better for the rest of your life. And hearing things that you're doing from a professional sense of like healthcare and how it ties into like what I communicate or what Kurt or all the coaches here communicate, I think that's empowering for people to hear. And I think that'll be a good thing to just spread.
Yeah.
That it's not just gimmicky. It's not just people like throwing you some stuff that you want to hear. It's actual people that actually care. And what we do is matters.
Right.
And you matter as a person. And how can we help?
Right.
What can we do?
Right.
What can we do? COVID threw a wrench and all that, but you figured it out.
We're getting through it.
Opening your own business, I'm sure had some stress.
Yes, always.
So you might be doing some extra Pilates these days. But that's good. I think that everything you said really just ties into like what we think here and what people need to hear, I think, from a real perspective.
Right.
From someone in your position. And you have anything else to add, or you want to talk about anything else? I think I have a question here is like, are you accessible? You are remote.
I am remote. So I guess the caveat to that is I can only see patients that live in Florida because I'm licensed in Florida. So I can live anywhere but I can only see people that live in the state of Florida because that's where I'm licensed. So I can't.
Let's spread it up to all of Florida then.
Yeah, all of Florida. Yeah, all of Florida. I can see anyone that's there. But again, I mean, a lot of the patients that I see, my niche has been like trauma. So, and I think even with trauma too, yoga is a big component that can help with healing as well, because trauma is stored at a cellular level. So it's in our body. It's not just like in our mind. That's why people have like physical, psychological, mental, I mean, any type of reaction you can think of. It ends up occurring in individuals that have been diagnosed and experience PTSD related symptoms. So stretching can also be a good thing to help with not only individuals that have some level of trauma or mood disorders, or you don't even have to have anything. Just doing it can also be helpful too. Again, kind of going back to mindfulness and meditation and things like that. Gosh, I can talk on it for a while. I mean, even with like running, I just put some notes here. Like running can also help control like manic episodes and manic symptoms in those that experience bipolar disorder.
Oh, wow.
So it can also provide just like a calming effect that helps mood regulation.
Why specifically running? Do you know? Just the chemical that your body gets from running? That's interesting.
Yep. The endorphins, again, it's there. Because you figure an individual that's or experiencing a manic episode, they have an extremely elevated mood. So if you can stimulate it in some other way, it can relax them.
All right. Makes sense. In a sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Once you dumb it down for me,
best way I can kind of like explain that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, I mean, I would say any type of exercise, whether it's cycling, running, yoga, Pilates, boxing, anything like that.
Yeah.
Keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything. Just find something you like.
Right. But also just taking care of yourself as a whole, not just focusing on one aspect of your body and neglecting another.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to mention,
Go ahead, mention
there's a reason why your brain's at the top of your body. Because if that's not functioning healthy, the rest of everything below it is going to start to malfunction.
So important to take care of those mentals, huh?
Well, it's important to start there.
Yeah.
I mean, the brain is the most, we don't really understand the brain. I mean, there's a lot of research to it, but there's no one that's the same.
Yeah.
So.
That's wild to think about, like outer space kind of stuff.
Yes. It's true. Yeah. It's really true though.
Yeah.
So.
That's, I mean, again, for people to hear that, I think it's going to be good that they're not alone in that sense, that there are people out there that could help, like yourself, and even like a coach or someone that in that position to help you.
Sure.
Even just keep showing up in that sense.
Right.
Like if you have someone to do that, someone else to help you with another part of your life, all important and all tie into the ultimate goal of you keeping you happy and healthy, and sustaining that for the rest of your life. So that's a big part of what this podcast is hopefully does for people, and spread that as much as we can. So that's why I like to get on as many type of varieties as I can to have people give their insight, and people who speak very well like you, who understand a lot and know how to communicate it. I think that's super important too, the communication aspect of it. So we're thankful that there are people like you out there.
Appreciate it. And vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool how we can kind of tie it all together, and that's kind of the whole point in helping as much as we can. So I mean, I appreciate you coming on, unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
I mean, I can go on, but
sure.
I'll be respectful of an hour.
I would love to have you on whenever you'd like. We can make it happen again. Even if I can zoom you in, make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, we can do that.
And easily accessible. So, I mean, if you want to come back to Pittsburgh when it's snowy out and stuff, it's fine.
Maybe when it's warm next time.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely like to incorporate all that into the episode, but I like to also end it with something that's positive that's happening, or something that's happened in your life or you're looking forward to. Be work related, it can be anything. I know we talked about you came home to see your best friend's baby.
Yeah,
that's something that's
my best friend or baby.
I saw how happy it made you, so that's good. Yeah.
Dopamine's going off my brain.
Are you seeing them later today, or?
Yes,
okay.
I'm gonna see them later today. Something exciting. I don't know what I'm gonna do while I'm here. I'm kind of just
hanging out.
Yeah, I got to see family. So I've been staying with my uncle, and I got to hang out with him.
Where's Uncle stay at?
He's in Center.
Okay. Back in Center Township.
Back in Center Township. Right. So that was fun. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like some. I'm thinking about like crazy food, like something like good to eat.
Yeah, what, you gonna eat any good food?
I don't know.
All right.
We're going to Biba tonight, so I've never been there.
In Beaver. Oh yeah, I've actually never been there either.
Yeah.
And I've lived in Beaver my whole life.
So excited about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just been business as usual.
Are you going there with the baby and your friend?
Yeah.
Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, so
yeah, that's good.
Fun.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, just get to see people I care about.
Yeah, be home for a few days and enjoy the nice weather we're having here.
Oh yeah, love the rain.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing, just kind of hanging out. I'm really was excited about this episode and kind of getting you on, and I think it's going to be a great one for people to hear, kind of that more variety that we have, and someone as intelligent as you talking about everything that you talked about and how passionate it seems you are, because I mean I could just tell that from us communicating back and forth that you really do care, and that's all people really want to know, is if people actually care. So that fires me up in a sense, so I'm excited to get this rolling out for people to hear. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm excited for warmer weather,
right? It's coming. It has to.
It's NCAA tournament time. I love watching basketball all weekend. So, those things that make me happy. It's cool.
There you go. Yes.
But yeah, thank you for coming on, and I really appreciate it. I think we'll definitely have to get you on again, and we can pick some topics to really specify on if you want to talk about COVID and have its own episode there. That'd be a great time, I think. But yeah. Would be. Yeah, thanks for coming on. We'll get you back, but
thanks. I appreciate it.
You have been listening to the Pros with Con podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Anchor. Come back each week for a new episode. Thanks for listening.